everybody speaks dialect or language variation, right? It is not a disorder. It is not something wrong with it. It is who you are, how you are. And guess what? You can't help it, right? Because it's who we are. And so language varies by race, ethnicity, culture, and all of that. And there's tons of language variation across the country.
Welcome to Fathers Read 365 Family Literacy Webinar. Our phenomenal panelists here. So, Dr. Monica is a licensed speech language pathologist with over 25 years of experience. She earned her doctorate of education with a concentration in reading science from Mount St. Joseph University. Her expertise includes implementing large-scale initiatives, helping districts implement systematic change for culturally and linguistically diverse students and staff, training educators and state-level leaders in NTSS and assessments, and providing embedded classroom instructional coaching. She had the opportunity to serve a wide range of populations, including pre-K to 12 students with developmental delays, pre-K to 12 students with language-based literacy differences, and neurologically impaired adults. Dr. Covington-Cradle is an adjunct professor at St. John's University, where she teaches courses about the intersection of language and literacy to undergraduate and graduate students. Welcome, Dr. Covington-Cradle. We're so grateful to have you. I am going to now introduce Dr. Heather Fleming, who is an educator, literacy advocate, and former finance executive whose work is deeply rooted in personal experience. Her journey began when her third grade son was diagnosed with dyslexia after years of struggling with reading and writing. Following his diagnosis, she earned a dyslexia certificate, a master's in reading science, and a doctorate in education from Mount St. Joseph's University. Might see that parallel there. Known for her collaborative, strengths-based approach to systems change, Dr. Fleming partners with a wide range of stakeholders, from parents and teachers to government agencies and philanthropic organizations, to design and implement evidence-based policies and training that support equitable access to evidence-based instruction. She has taught reading, authored literacy legislation, and founded two nonprofits and a consulting firm on improving literacy outcomes. Handful. Shout out to our panelists. So I want to have you come on and unmute yourselves. And before I dive into the next screen about our problem to solve, can you just tell our group and our attendees what drew you to advocacy and reading?
So I guess I would probably say that I'm a lifelong educator. And if I'm honest, I love being a speech path. But after 20 or so, 18 or so years, I was a little jaded. And it was actually my husband, who is a high school principal, who sparked the interest in me going on a professional journey on my own to find out why he wanted to fire his ninth grade teacher who told him that she was not a reading teacher and that when they get to her, they need to be able to read. And he said, I'm an educator at heart. I need to know, I need her to go. She can't teach in my school. Can you believe she said that? And I said, I absolutely can. I can believe that she said that because I don't know what I would do. And I said, the biggest question for me is why can't that ninth grader read? That was the bigger question, right? And so I went on that professional journey on my own, ended up getting accepted to this wonderful school, Mount St. Joseph's, for reading science. And here I sit today, a doctor, still a speech path. That's in my DNA. You know, I'm from the South. I love to talk and I love helping people. And so it just all goes. And now I've added literacy to it and I couldn't be happy. So I like to say speech language pathology is my passion, but reading science and the intersection of that is my calling.
I love that. So we're so excited to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. And Monica and I were in the same doctoral program. We very much pulled each other through it and have become the best of friends. My journey really began when my third grade son after several years of really struggling to learn how to read and essentially being told it was his fault by schools, when he was finally diagnosed with dyslexia. And we essentially moved for him to go to a school that helps catch up dyslexic kids. And when we moved back to our home state, I was really driven to ensure that, particularly parents who didn't have the flexibility that I had, I picked up and moved to a school. I brought him to a school that serves dyslexic kids. I was really driven to ensure that parents who didn't have that flexibility never had to go through what we went through, which is why I ended up rewriting Wyoming's reading law and starting some nonprofits to fund additional teacher training. And I met Brent and Akif in 2019 at an event at Temple University, and I was really struck by their personal stories and also the way that they were approaching low literacy. And I wrapped my arms around Brent's ankles, and I have not let go ever since then. And so this is just a really exciting part of the journey for me and Monica.
According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, about 65% of American fourth graders are not reading at a proficient level, and only 12% of African American fourth graders. According to the International Dyslexia Association, dyslexia affects approximately 15 to 20% of the population, which is around 1 in 5 individuals. So when you see that statistic and you guys live, and breathe these numbers, what is the most alarming piece about that statistic?
So I'll start out and answer because I live in Brooklyn, New York, you guys, but I'm from Prince George's County, Maryland. That's where I went to public school. So I'm a public school kid. And I think what really is alarming about that statistic is another statistic that about maybe 85% of teachers don't really know or aren't taught how the brain learns how to read. And so you can't do something that you don't know, right? And putting blame nowhere, but just alarmed that, even me as a speech path, literacy is within our scope of practice. But even now, my grad level clinicians and my undergrads tell me that, we're not doing a very good job of at the pre-service level or at the, when students are in college of teaching them this so that they can help our students, and especially culturally and linguistically diverse students. So for me, knowing that, again, we can't do what we don't know, and that it disproportionately affects African American children, particularly, or children of color, period, if you speak a different language and things like that. And so knowing that, I wanted to be one in the forefront of, I always say, I don't want us to keep being the last at the party, right? When flipping houses became in vogue, it was over by the time we got in, right? And so with this, I don't want us, clinicians, teachers, educators as a whole, and especially those who serve the most marginalized, to be the last to the party. So I want to make sure that we come equipped with the skills that we need to help everybody. This is not a luxury. Reading is a right. It's an innate right.
And what are reading differences, just so that people can understand some of the terminology we're going to be using later on in some of the slides. So reading differences that we reference impacts that number you saw before is occurs when a person has difficulty reading words or understanding what they read. And that's based on the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And so with that goes hand in hand, and I'm going to flip this over to Dr. Monica, is learning to speak. Let's start from the foundation.
Yes.
What is learning to speak, and why is that important, and what the formula is for teaching kids to read?
Right, absolutely. And so what we know, and from just like common sense, that we are innately born, the human brain is innately born to be able to speak. So as long as nothing's wrong with your hearing, and as long as someone speaks to you, you will learn how to talk. Okay, that's natural. Our brains are wired for speech. We learn to speak by being spoken to in the language that we're used to, that we're loved in, right? How our parents speak to us and engaging in those conversations. And so just think about your children, your babies, they babble first and then they do kind of like that pebbles and bam bam stuff. We call that jargoning. And then they start to acquire words, phrases, sentences until finally they're speaking. That's natural. So the learning to read part, though, so that's what we're naturally able to do, and that's where reading actually starts, right? Oral language or our language kind of like is the foundation. I like to say it's the bedrock of how we learn to read because our sound system, so the speech sounds that we acquire naturally are used in order to be able to read. So reading is not natural. It's a man-made construct or concept, right? And it's based upon the letters that we choose. And we speak English, so I'm just going to talk about English, but it could be any letter where letters represent those sounds. Our brains are not wired for to understand how letters represent sounds. And so therefore the brain must be taught to read, or we must teach the brain how to map our sound system onto our written system. And that's how it happens.
And I'm going to jump in here with a question in chat that I think is kind of important, which is, can a child that's struggling with reading be a great speaker?
This was my child. My child had amazing vocabulary. He was a great speaker. As Monica discussed, we learn to speak by hearing those around us speak, right? The trouble he had was connecting the sounds and the words, the sound system, to the letters that represent those words, right? So the answer is absolutely.
Mhm.
And it's part of the reason why dyslexia, we call it kind of the invisible difference, because children, you can't see it, you don't hear it when they speak, and so the answer is absolutely. Kids can be and adults with dyslexia or who struggle with reading can be fabulous speakers. Building on what Dr. Monica talked about, there is, I'm going to show you this in this format, and I'm going to show it to you actually overlaid on a brain so you can understand the parts of the brain that do this. There is a part of our brain that manipulates language, that understands sounds. If I say the word cat, this part of the brain can take that apart into cat, cat. That's the part of our brain that is naturally wired for language. There's another part of our brain that we have to teach to connect the sounds in the language, cat, to the letters that represent those sounds, C-A-T. Then there's yet a third part of our brain where we store meaning of words. So we can picture a cat when we hear the word cat. And so when this circuit, for people for whom reading is not hard, this circuit runs like a superhighway. It's very efficient. And when that circuit is complete, words get stored in long-term memory and can be easily recognized and easily spelled.
Mhm.
So this slide is that same idea, but just so you can see it in the brain. If you put your hand up on the left, I guess I should do it this way, on the left side of your brain, the red part is the front of the brain, and that's where we can understand and manipulate sounds.
Mhm.
At. A little further back is the part of the brain that we use to connect the sounds and letters. And kind of down under is where we store meaning. And this is sort of an oversimplification, but I think it's important to understand as we discuss what dyslexia is. So sound, sounds and letters, meaning, and then way in the back is where things get stored in long-term memory. So this is, I think it's important to explain things at least 3 different ways. So this is the third way that I'm going to explain this, which is an idea called the simple view of reading. And it's not meant to imply that reading is simple because it's complex. But what this tells us is we have to be able to read the words on the page. So we have to recognize words. We also have to have the language, the background knowledge, the vocabulary to understand what we're reading. So we have to be able to read the words on the page and understand what we're reading in order to be able to interpret and use that information for reading comprehension to occur. And again, this may sound kind of obvious, but it's something that a lot of teachers actually aren't taught.
And so I just want to go over what we mean by word recognition, because I think it would be valuable as a parent to actually know what this means in like just functional layman terms so that it makes sense. So when we talk about word recognition, we're actually talking about our students being able, or our kiddos being able to have something called phonemic awareness and phonics. And this has to be explicitly, obviously, concretely, outwardly. I can't use any more, like it's obvious. We don't let them discover, or we don't let them determine on their own or make mistakes with it. So we want them to be able, first and foremost, phonemic awareness, and that is sounds. So phonemic means sounds, awareness. So we want them basically to be able to identify which sound do you hear in all of these words. Pig, push, and pop at the beginning. They should say, not P, because that's the letter, but I want to know that they can identify sound, that they can segment sounds like Heather just did with cat, at. So I said each individual sound of that word, and that they could blend the sounds. So that would be, tell me what word that I'm trying to say, what word I'm saying. A, they should say cake, right? And we need to teach that at a very young age, kindergarten, pre-K, all about sounds. So it shouldn't just be, it should be play, but it should be play with sounds in structured ways, right? And then teach those letter sound relationships. You might hear as parents someone say letter sound correspondence, letter sound relationships. You know, I'll tell teachers things like the alphabetic principle. Let me tell you what that simply is, just plainly, it's do they know the sounds of the English language and that match the letters of our English alphabet? And can they do that automatically, instantaneously? That's what word recognition and phonemic awareness is, the sounds without any letters. Phonics is when you add the letters and sounds. And so when we talk about having difficulty with that, let's just look at what we call that is, I call it language-based learning differences. In the literature, formerly, we're going to know that as what people say, dyslexia, right? Dyslexia. Dyslexia, we can break that word down, is simply dys, meaning difficulty, and lexia actually is the root word for language. So difficulty with language or language-based learning differences. A child who unexpectedly has difficulty reading, writing, spelling words quickly and accurately would be someone that we would look for dyslexia. The ability to memorize math facts and do word problems may also be impacted.
So I just want to point out, as we talk about dyslexia and what it is and what it isn't, it is, if the top line of the triangle, the one that goes between sounds and words and letters and words, simply put, this is the real difficulty that kids with dyslexia have and just need a lot of practice with. And so I just want you to have that in your mind, that it's the difference, it's the difficulty connecting sounds and letters as we go into talking about dyslexia. So it's really important that people understand that dyslexia is not caused by a lack of intelligence. It's not caused by a lack of focus or effort or motivation, or most importantly, reading, how much you read to or by, or a child reads. You know, schools often want to blame parents for children not being able to read, which is absurd because number one, parents aren't reading teachers, and number two, reading to a child is certainly a great thing to do. It builds their, you know, their knowledge, their vocabulary, and their exposure to text. But reading to a child doesn't teach them how to read. So I just want to make sure that people understand that dyslexia is not, you know, not intelligence, not focus, not effort. It's also not a vision problem. It's a language processing problem. It's not a vision problem. It's not seeing letters or words backwards or upside down. As Amber mentioned, it's not particularly rare. It's somewhere between 15 to 20% of the population, and it's not something that's outgrown.
And Heather, we want to mention that it's also not writing letters backwards.
Correct. Although you may see that, you may
see
see
that, yes.
Transpose letters, but that in and of itself, that's a great point, Dr. Monica, does not by itself does not indicate dyslexia. So dyslexia is the most common cause of difficulty reading and spelling words. And so this is where, you know, family history is really important when you're wondering whether your child might have difficulty with reading. In my family, nobody was ever diagnosed with dyslexia, and so I didn't know we had it in our family. I did know that there were some people who struggled with reading, but I didn't know that that's what it was called. It is, as Dr. Monica mentioned, a difference in how the brain processes language. It's genetic. It doesn't necessarily go from every parent to every child. It can skip it, if it's typically if someone is dyslexic, typically someone in the close family tree also has dyslexia. It might be a grandfather or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle. And dyslexia is treated with academic intervention, not with
Not
medicine.
medicine. Mhm. Great point.
What would you add anything to that, Dr. Monica?
Yes. I would also say that you don't outgrow it and you don't give it time. As a speech path, I want to hit it hard, I want to hit it early. So as soon as we see these things that we know are related to dyslexia, we need to be waving the red flag. We need to be advocating as parents. We need to be advocating. We need to be saying something. See something, say something right away. I suspect it. I'd rather you come to me and I be able to tell you, no, it's not that. Don't worry. This is what you can do, as opposed to waiting. It's not that you outgrow it or wait, he's when you cut his hair, it'll no, 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 no. Early and often. I'd rather me be able to tell you, nope, that's not it, as opposed to you waiting and you in your gut you knew that something may be wrong.
So this is something that really would have helped me when my son was even as early as pre-K. Just kind of some red flags to look for dyslexia. So I'm going to start with some pre-K signs, and there you will have access to a QR code that will bring you to everything I'm going to talk about, so you don't have to take notes or anything. Um, for kids who are 2 to 6 years old, if you notice that compared to other kids that are around or perhaps siblings, they have trouble learning alphabet names, like letter names, sounds. If they have trouble with rhyming, if they have trouble learning their colors, um, if they have trouble kind of trying to find the words they want to say, like that tip of your tongue feeling. I remember my son would go, what's that thing? It's red, and you put things in it, and you pull things, and there was always he was frustrated, and I'd say wagon, and he'd go, yeah, 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 wagon. Sometimes he would flip entire syllables of words. So instead of saying Pacific Ocean, he might say Pacific Ocean. Um, so they might mispronounce or confuse similar words. He used to tell me he wanted a marshmallow pizza when he wanted a mushroom pizza. He struggled a lot with concepts of time, like last night, tomorrow. He would say today night and the like night before. Left and right and kind of above and below directions can be hard for kids as kind of early signs. And then also kids may start speaking a little bit later than their peers. Um, as you start to get into the older grades, they will be behind in reading, and their spelling might be phonetic. So they might spell something like of UV because that's how it sounds. They might spell was WUZ. And, this is sort of normal, maybe in early first grade, but when this continues through second and third grade, that's a red flag. Their handwriting, because again, handwriting is part of language processing. Forming letters can be very hard. And so their handwriting can look sort of, they'll have some uppercase and some lowercase, and they might be kind of not really in a line, and some are bigger than others. The handwriting's a little wonky. You may not notice this at home, but they will have trouble taking notes off the board because that requires them to look at something, interpret, process, and then produce the letters. So that can be hard for them. And they can have difficulty, again, for older kids, just getting their thoughts onto paper. They can give you a great oral kind of presentation of something, but when they're trying to get onto paper, it's really hard. And again, you're going to have a link to a whole list of signs that you can kind of look through from pre-K to 12th grade.
All right. Monica, I'm gonna throw this to you, and this is something I think is actually really interesting, with how language variation can really impact, reading differences and language variances by race, ethnicity, and region. People don't consider and think about with child development. So, can you talk about the impact of dialect in a child's development of reading and learning?
Abs- Absolutely. Thank you for that, Amber and Dr. Heather. So when we think about our kiddos and as they start to use language. So first and foremost, what everybody needs to know is that there is not one native academic language speaker, right? Book language, academic language, general American English is a taught thing also, only used in an academic setting or professional setting or for business, right? We all talk how we were spoken to. And it is absolutely who we are, our best and most authentic self. And so when we talk about language variation, we talk about the language that the kiddos, that the students are bringing with them. And everybody speaks dialect or language variation, right? It is not a disorder. It is not something wrong with it. It is who you are, how you are. And guess what? You can't help it, right? Because it's who we are. And so language varies by race, ethnicity, culture, and all of that. And there's tons of language variation across the country. There's Chicano English, there's African American English, there's Southern English, there's Appalachian English. Even Philadelphia has a dialect that is highly studied, and New York, that we call it New Yorkese. I have some people in the audience from Maryland. Baltimoreese is another dialect, right? And each language variation or dialect of English, right, has its own sound system and grammar and the way we use it. We call that formally syntax. Everybody else knows it as grammar. So language variation in each dialect has its rules, as does academic English or book language. And I call it general American English. So, how does that impact us and our kiddos when they're trying to learn how to read? Well, they're coming to it from this academic setting, and they're bringing what they have. They're bringing who they are, how they are. And so they have a different sound system that they've been using for 5 years, 6 years, and now they're in this school that is requiring them to master another dialect of language variation, the academic language that's used in a school setting. And so because of that, teachers have to be highly knowledgeable. And it's not, as I said, it's not about if you speak a dialect, because everyone does. It's how much dialect you speak that impacts your ability to read and master this book language or academic language. So oral language for dialect speakers doesn't match the sounds and the sentences and the way that we use it in school. It doesn't match sometimes. It's a mismatch. And so what does that mean? Doesn't mean something's wrong with them. It just means they need more time in order to learn this academic text, this academic language, right? This academic sound system. Give you a perfect example. So when I'm at home at my block party, trust me, I'm speaking the way I want to speak. And I'm not even worried about how I'm speaking about now, because I'm my most authentic self, right? So I might say with, right? With WIF. I'm with my boys. Yes, I am. I'm with you. I'm going with you to the bodega, right? I would definitely say that. However, the context calls for it and I'm comfortable, and that's who I am. I also know when I am speaking or maybe when I'm reading a book that the author has spelled with a diagraph or with a TH sound, with, right? And I'm able to organically just move between both languages or language variations, right? And no one has to tell me, don't speak like this, speak like that. I just naturally do it. Why? Because I'm a master of my language variation that I use at home and in social context. And I'm a master of the academic language because I was taught. And I just was given more opportunities to master it. And that's the way we're looking at it. We want to have our students, when they come to us with their dialect, first and foremost, we want to know about it. We want to know the features. We want to know the sound system, the differences that may exist. But we also want to know how to use that to get them to be able to learn how to read and write this academic language. And that's the way we want them to have full access of their linguistic repertoire, I love to say. And we want it to a strength base. It's not a down, it's just something, it's like someone who speaks Spanish. You would never tell them, don't speak Spanish. You have to speak English at this time. So why do we do it with language variation?
Mm.
What we're saying to teachers is that we should not, we do not, because nothing's wrong with it. It's a, it's just what it is, and you need to know more about it so you can help teach them this other thing that they also have to master.
And if there are teachers on here, that the idea that you can say, because teachers don't know how to sort of deal with that sometimes, and you can say, listen, you can pronounce this word whiff or with, and this is how it's spelled, right? Like there's no, it's yes and it's not.
Yes, it's not yes and no. And there are rules to it, right? There's rules to African American English, Philadelphia E's, New York E's. Like I'm allowed to drop the schwa instead of saying the ER, water, right? I'm allowed. That's it. That's what it is. But I also know that I need to spell it when I'm writing because there's rules to that too. The rule is that it's water and it's spelled Water.
Mm.
It's not about how we're not trying to change the way people speak. We're trying to teach them proficient reading and writing. And there's just more opportunities for practice that we need to give them and learn more about the language that they bring to school with them, the language that they're loved in.
So, quick question for you, actually, both of you, because we only have a few slides before we open up the Q&A. Do you see resistance at all or a lot when it comes to dialects and training educators on the importance of that? Or do you normally see people adapt this type of concept?
Okay, so I'll probably take that one since I'm in New York and we have a lot of language variation, right? So I would tell you that I don't see pushback. What I see is uncertainty about how to teach them without downgrading their oral language and where to go to get the knowledge about the sound system of Chicano American English or Caribbean American English, right? If they're not Caribbean, or and the syntactic system. Where do I go to find out this information? I don't see pushback. Everybody, when I give that speech, agrees that no, you shouldn't be downgrading someone for the way that they speak. But as educators, they do want to know, how do I help them, right? Because I do know as a person of color, as an educator of color, that we know how hard it is. We know that, it's other stuff that we face. And Heather knows too. She's not a person of color. It's other stuff that they face. And so they have to be prepared and they have to be, educated so that they can operate in both in any context that they choose.
And
That's all.
Colleen Danielson in the chat asked a cute question to you both, which is along this lines is how do you respond to educators who say, quote, but as a teacher, isn't it my job to teach them how to speak properly? We get this question a lot.
Yes, and I say to them, they are speaking properly. We're not trying to change. It's not about what they speak, it's what you're trying to do. Keep your focus. You're trying to teach them how to read and write. You're not trying to change the way they speak. It's not about how they speak. It's about how do you teach them to read and write this academic or this book language and yes, and value the language that they speak. It's a yes and a yes. We're
Wow.
not trying to change the way they speak. And so when we talk about teaching a child to read, it starts as early as pre-K with the oral language. So you being able to make sure that they are acquiring that oral language as I discussed earlier. Then we get into helping them manipulate those sounds that I spoke about. And at everything that we do when we talk about reading instruction, it should be explicit, it should be overt, it should be obvious, it should be no stone unturned when we're talking about it. So that means that the teacher has to be very knowledgeable. It should be systematic. What do I mean? I mean that it should follow the natural order and pattern of language when we're teaching them. So what are the common sounds first? And then what are the common letters that represent those sounds that have just one sound attached to it? And I know that sounds probably like, what is she talking about? I'm talking about, it, like a C. How do we pronounce C? Well, C can be hard C, and it also can be soft C. as in scent, right? As in cycle, right? And so it has to be systematic. We teach from easier to most complex, and then it has to be cumulative. By that, we mean that it has to build on what they already know. It has to have a real review process that happens. So they go back to it to check that they really do know it and that it's cumulative. They layer it on and on and on from easiest to most complex. Of course, we're not just talking about letters and sounds. That's a part of it, right? But the end goal of reading, of course, is comprehension. So we have to build their knowledge of a lot of different topics so that they can connect to the passages that they're reading. And of course, you can't read if you don't understand the words. That's vocabulary. That it just makes common sense. This is not rocket science when we explain it like that. And so those are the components of reading instruction. It must be explicit, it must be systematic, it must be cumulative. They must crack the code, you may have heard them say, knowing what letters represent what sounds. And then they have to have knowledge and they have to know the meanings of those words that they're reading. And that's how you get comprehension.
Dyslexia is a difficulty at its core, connecting sounds and letters, right? There's other things it impacts, but in general, it's connecting sounds and letters. And most teachers in teacher preparation programs these days are not taught how to teach this connection, which may be surprising because it would seem obvious, but they're not. They are told things like tell the child to look at the picture, ask the child what word makes sense, look at the first letter, guess the rest of it, right? So it's sort of these guessing strategies that they're taught instead of explicitly teaching, as Dr. Monica talked about, sound symbol relationships until they master them. And so as a result of this, if a dyslexic kid is, normal intelligence, works hard, but has trouble connecting sounds and letters, and they're not being taught that, they are really hosed. And so the kinds of things that I want to point out to you are the kind of things that I heard as a parent. And that if you are concerned that you have a struggling reader and you hear these things, I want you to be able to call people out. I am also available always to help you do that. Sometimes not always diplomatically. If you hear if you hear someone say reading is natural, boys learned later, little Joey will just catch up, right? Or, well, Sarah just needs to try harder. Like she just needs to focus a little more, right? But don't worry, we'll catch her up. It's magical. She'll magically blossom. It doesn't just magically blossom, right? It's not natural. They just need to focus or try harder. I remember being told, Mom, not all kids are good at all subjects, and you really shouldn't put so much pressure on him. I was like, I don't think my kid's a genius, but like he's in third grade and can't read the word cat. Saying the kid just needs to read more. They can't. And then this was my favorite. Are you sure, Miss Fleming, that you read to him at home? Right. So because teachers don't necessarily have the knowledge they need always to teach reading to all kids, right? This isn't just about dyslexic kids. The majority of kids, as you can see from the reading statistics, are not learning how to read well. Dyslexic kids are really hosed again because they struggle with the sound letter connection. So I just want you to see these. And also if you see this cute little graphic, like eagle eye, look at the picture, Flippy the dolphin, flip the vowel. What does that even mean? Skippy the frog, skip the word and come back to it. You try reading a paragraph where you've got to skip every other word and come back to it. You can't comprehend it, right? It's just nonsense. Anyway, so these are the things that I want to say, like, nope. Like, if you hear these things, this is not appropriate.
Great segue to our wrap up here. Tisha Clark actually brought up a good point of what we put in here, which is how can a child get tested for dyslexia?
If you are concerned that your child is really struggling with reading, I put a link to a letter that I wrote in the formal request evaluation that basically lays out for you exactly how you request an evaluation by your school. Schools won't tell you that it has to be in writing. They won't tell you what it has to include. So I drafted a letter parents can just fill their stuff in on. And again, I'm always happy to help if it feels overwhelming. So that's step one. If you believe your child is struggling, you can request for the school to do a formal evaluation. You can also pay for a private evaluation. The problem is that those can be $3,000 to $5,000. And just because you have a diagnosis of something from a private psychologist doesn't guarantee you services at school, because the
Mhm.
school has to determine that your child
Mhm.
has a problem too. It's
Mhm.
so again, it's not always, you don't always want to spend that kind of money, right? The first step I would say is to request an evaluation by the school. You should also know that if they do an evaluation and you think the results are nonsense, you can ask them to pay for an external evaluation, right? So there's a whole process that, again,
Mhm.
we can talk through, or I can support people with offline. It's okay.
Mhm.
It's helpful. But there are a number of ways to go about it.
Yes. Um, but as parents, first you want to be very diligent about trusting your instincts. So if I have an early toddler, if I have someone who's not meeting those developmental milestones in language, things like, they stop talking, or after 18 months, they're not acquiring language or words rapidly, like week by week or every 2 weeks, right? The marker really is they babble at 6 months. By 15 months, they start to do that pebbles and bam bam. Like I said, "Do, do, da, 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 da." That's called jargoning. And then they start to say true words or close approximations, right? Sue, goggy, even. They can say goggy, and you know that they mean whoop, 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 right? Doggy. That's what they're trying to say. And then they start picking up these words from 18 to 24 months really, really rapidly. So the marker is by 18 months, we want them to have 50 words. I'm a person that works in ranges. I don't believe in absolutes on anything. So I'm going to say 30 to 50 words by 18 months, and they're rapidly every 2 weeks acquiring more. If that's not happened, red flags, yellow flag, I want someone to look at them. Every state has what's called the early intervention program for babies 0 to 3. And in that QR code, I think Heather linked it for the early signs where you can get someone, a speech language pathologist, and every state, the 50 states, um, someone like me, I used to work for EI to evaluate them. First and foremost, I want the gap to be really, really small. If I get them at 18 months, 20 months, that's a little bit of time that I have to play with them and get them to talking, as opposed to someone who's 3 and I thought that they were, and I knew that he was delayed, Monica, at 19 months. He wasn't acquiring the language. Now I have 2.5 years to make up, as opposed to 3 months, right? So early signs are going to be language signs, because remember, we have to teach them to read, right? So it's going to be those early signs of language, right? That is the precursor to reading. And in all of this, I can't stress this enough. Trust your instincts. You are your child's best advocate. You know them better than Heather, Dr. Heather and I, or Amber, or anybody. Advocate, advocate, advocate. And advocate doesn't mean that we're yelling and screaming and shouting. It means that I'm saying, I know something's wrong and I want something to be done about it. And I'm not asking for nothing that the system doesn't already provide.
Yeah, and I will tell you, they will work. I mean, as a parent who went through this, and Monica's seen it too, you will be made to feel like you're crazy. You will
Yes.
be gaslit. They will work really hard to make you think that you're imagining this, right? And so again, I would just reiterate what Dr. Monica said, which is like, I wish I had trusted my instinct when my son was in kindergarten, right? Like I kept asking questions and being like, oh, these people have masters in reading. I guess they know, right? So that's really important.
And pediatricians, they will tell you, wait.
We don't want them labeled. If we don't label things, we can't treat them. If I go to the doctor and they put a blood pressure cuff on and my blood pressure is high, if we don't call it high blood pressure and then do a diagnostic to figure out why I have high blood pressure, we can't treat it, right? It's not about labeling from a negative perspective. It's about labeling so that we understand what to do and how to help them,
Right,
right?
and can get help.
And if anyone is open to come on camera, we can unmute your microphone, or just, ask your question on audio. You can do so as well. But we had some really interesting comments in here that I just want to throw out to you both. Marcy says, I feel like they only help when it's extreme.
Right. That goes back to the advocating, right? Um, we have to kind of like overtly tell them what it is that we want. And it's okay to say, I want to rule it out. I don't want to wait. I want to be proactive, not reactive. I'm just asking for, I know something. I'd rather someone look at it and tell me, no, it's not that. It's not about right or wrong. It's about getting what we need early.
Leah has a question. I'm gonna bring you on, Leah, if you're interested.
Mhm.
Hi. So yeah, this is amazing. I'm so grateful for this. I'm here from Detroit with Detroit Parent Network. What I wanted to share is that I my PhD is in literacy. I teach folks who are becoming teachers how to teach reading. And I think that what we don't center enough as families, as parents, is understanding that most teachers are doing what they do every day with love. They've had very little training and evidence-based practices in reading. And by the way, culturally relevant teaching our babies is also evidence-based practice, right? So I love that you
Absolutely.
lifted that up. But when you shared that bookmark about like Chunky Monkey and Eagle Eye, that's being used again and again in classrooms. And the more that we can say as families, hey, our babies have a right to read, they have a right to evidence based reading instruction. And we need to remember that it's not just like quote unquote older teachers, colleges of education are still teaching these disproven methods.
Mhm.
So, bravo, bravo to all of you. This is so powerful. Thank you.
Dr. Van Bell, thank you so much for that. And you're right on the root ball. We talk about this. The root ball of the problem
And this lays
is
at the higher ed.
is higher ed, right? And so like we both do a lot of work with faculty, observing classes, reviewing syllabi, helping them change things who are interested, right? We can only work with the coalition of the willing, but I mean, all the points you made are and and it is true. Like I harbor obviously some anger about the things that happened to my son, but the truth is the teachers just didn't know what they were doing, right?
Exactly.
I love that you raised that up. Thank you for that, Dr. Van Bell.
Exactly. Yes, and I want to also say that, that's why we want to do and uplift the work that Heather does with legislation. Like, in order for get higher ed to change, we have to have teeth behind us. So we can talk till we're blue in the face and we can beg and plead and beg. But if you have tenure and you've been doing this for a long time, then you don't necessarily have to. We have some states out there who are really doing great work, like Colorado, that they must teach this or they can't give out teaching licenses. This is the type of thing that we're talking about, that we need teeth. This lies, you should get this training while you're in school, young brain and revving and ready to go, right? You should not have to wait until you are a licensed teacher, because I licensed you and said, you know how to do your job well. Here, I'm going to give you this license, but yet I have not prepared you. And so there's a lot of prongs to this. But at the end of the day, like Dr. Heather said, this lies at the feet of higher ed, and we all know that. Thank you, Dr. Leah. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 5 more minutes, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Can you both just, briefly talk to us, give us some final thoughts just to take everyone home with on, why is this work? We know why it's important, but what can you give to these parents and educators that are, frustrated and really feel like they need something to get them past that, those frictions, the difficulties and the restrictions, honestly, within the system. And how can they follow you to, get more resources from you, because you're very much highly educated and your resume speaks for yourselves on, the knowledge that you have in the community that you've built with Fathers Read.
So for me, I think it really starts with relationships are ground zero, right? And so you need to have a relationship with your teacher to be able to say, even say, hey, I went to this Father's Read 365 and they were talking about assessment and explicit instruction and all of those things. Are we doing that? Show me. What are we doing? How are you being explicit? How are you being systematic? Do you monitor their language development and things like if your child's in preschool? Where does that sit in your curriculum? Show me, I want to be a partner. Show me what I can and cannot do. But I want to say to parents, the expectation is not that you teach your child how to read. That is foremost and forthright a teacher's job. And if you can hear, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about assessment, we're talking about all of these words that you don't know. And so what I tell my teachers who I train is we are the ones who have to teach them to read and write. A dentist puts on braces and no one expects for you to take your child to the dentist and then push them back to you and say, hey, put the braces on. So why are we taking kids and saying to the parents, hey, teach them to read? Yes, it's a nice to do that you are read to your child, but I want to be responsible for training teachers in front of my child who is knowledgeable about how the brain reads and stuff. So advocate, build a relationship, and ask questions.
I would say that we can identify signs of early reading difficulties, language difficulties as early as preschool. We know a lot about the best ways to teach reading to all children, right? And this explicit instruction we talk about benefits all children. And research suggests that 95% of children should be able to be at least average readers, if taught comprehensively by well-prepared teachers. And so I would view this kind of a call to arms, right? For parents, like Monica said, ask questions, trust your gut. For teachers, I organized a group of teachers who graduated from the University of Wyoming to write letters to the university after they had done some good training, essentially saying, you wasted my money, right? Legislators pay attention to that, especially for state-funded universities, right? And so, for teachers who are out there, like Monica and I open our hearts and minds to you. If there are things we can do to support you, goes for parents as well. Like, we're here because our babies are ending up in prison. My kid could have ended up in prison, right? And so like it is unconscionable that given how much we know, that this happens. And so just continue to be, to kind of to be disruptive.